Hee hee ha ha ho ho ha ha hee ho ha ha hee ho ha ha. That's funny, right? Did it make you laugh? Hey everyone, Joey here, aka Animus, and welcome to the inaugural Throwback Thursday. So I set up a vote on my last video, but that video kind of underperformed, so I set one up on my Instagram as well, and the results were 1 vote for Aphex Twin, 1 vote for Orbital, 3 votes for The Prodigy, and 5 votes for Daft Punk. So, let's review the album. Ooh, it's too hot. Do I need to explain to you who Daft Punk are? No, I probably don't, but if somehow you don't know, legendary French electronic duo Thomas Bangalter and Guy Manuel de Homem Christo, or however you say that. Obviously, one of the most famous and influential electronic acts of all time. Basically everyone loves them except my sister, and this is their debut album from 1997, Homework. This album is considered a classic by many electronic music fans. Do I think it's a classic? Well, it's pretty good. It's a good album. It's not bad. But I have some pretty major problems with Homework that keep me from absolutely loving it. I am sort of living in fear of getting flooded with dislikes, but this is a review and the point of it is to express my personal opinions, so allow me to explain. The general tone of Homework is pretty bare and not very complicated as far as electronic music goes, but what Daft Punk tried to do with the album is build fun, catchy dance hooks that stick in your head out of various samples and rough, abrasive synth noises. I think the biggest thing this album has going for it is these hooks. Some of them are absolutely phenomenal and barely a single one will leave your mind after you listen to the record a few times. Everyone remembers how Daft Punk and Around the World go, but there are so many other fantastic synth-lined samples and beats on this LP. So it's incredibly frustrating for me because they could have built a fantastic album off these loops. But it just wasn't really executed that well with a lot of the tracks. Often what they did was they took these loops, they made a sort of intro where things gradually start coming in, and then you get to the main hook. And that loops and loops and loops for about 5 minutes, and then the track ends. And then you get another one, which is roughly the same. When what they could have done to make a tight and cohesive but fun, enjoyable record would have been to cut about 20 minutes of the album by shortening the tracks to, you know, about 3-4 minutes, and then made the whole thing a continuous mix. Then it would have been a really fun dance record with just loads of catchy hooks to get stuck in your head. However, that's basically my only real substantial complaint with Homework, other than a few little nitpicks with individual tracks. So if I just go down the track listing, then we'll see some of the things I do really like about it. Yes, I'm doing the entire track listing. This is for you guys. The album opens with Daft and Direct, with this barely intelligible vocal sample with a flanger effect on it gradually filtering in. The funk back to the punk come. It's then joined by this punchy, stomping beat, and then a few synth and bass lines come in, which are very simple, but are fun in their acid housey quality. This track is basically just a kind of intro to the album and initially was not a big favourite of mine, but it's really grown on me recently because this is how I kind of wish the rest of the tracks on the album were executed. The track barely passes the 2-minute mark and is basically just Daft Punk playing around with a fun hook and then ending the track before it gets stale. And it also seamlessly transitions into the next track, WDPK 83.7 FM, which is a 28-second interlude. It's basically just the hook from an old track of theirs that wasn't featured on the album but was featured on a compilation, Musique, even though it sounds a bit like before a guy impersonating a radio DJ goes, WDPK 83.7, the sound of tomorrow, the music of today, brings you exclusively Daft Punk's Homework. Then there's Revolution 909, see what you did there, which is another track I really like. See what I mean? The album starts off strong. The track opens with what sounds like a big crowd of people having a party or protesting or something or other, before a voice over a megaphones go, "Stop the music and go home," and everyone goes, "Wah! Shut up!" It's really fun. It's a really enjoyable little intro. Then a section of this shouting crowd noise goes muffled and loops in the background of this awesome beat, along with this little weird clanking noise going doom 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 every now and then. It's a very low-key track from this point on, and that's why this hook doesn't get stale at all. And there's also these little subsections where the beat goes chopped up and repeats, and it sounds so satisfying, this. It's a great hook. It doesn't get annoying because it's a lot more low-key than the others, and it has more progression than a lot of the tracks. So Revolution 909 is definitely one of the best tracks on the album. Then another great track, Daft Punk, which is an absolute classic in the Daft Punk discography. It definitely lives up to its title. It is so funky, punchy, and fun. The beep 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 sound from the end of Daft and Direct comes back here, along with this beat that's just like, and it's so hard. There's a squealing bass line going, and how can any of us forget that instantly catchy, rough synth sound going, wow, 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 wow. I'm sorry, I promise this whole video won't just be me doing impersonations of the tracks. Okay, so we've just had about 15 minutes of awesomeness. Then we get the first relative dud in the album, Phoenix. It's not a terrible track, but I was really iffy on it the first time I heard it, and it's just got less and less interesting every time I've heard it. The hook is alright, but it really needs more to it. It's basically just a tiny little chopped up section of Don't Go Breaking My Heart by Elton John and Kiki D that goes, and that just kind of loops for 5 minutes, other than one little subsection where it cuts out and there's a bass line. But it's so bare. I mean, there are some tracks like this that I feel like I could have put together in the space of like an hour, and I know that sounds a bit disrespectful to Daft Punk because so many people call this album a classic, but I'm really not sure how long it would have taken to make something like Phoenix. After that we get Fresh, which could have suffered from the same problems as Phoenix. It's got a fairly similar, tiny little chopped up section of vocals and instrumental, but this track is made much more interesting by a few little elements. Namely, this big intro with just the sound of waves on the sea before distorted guitar comes in with surprisingly emotional sounding playing, which then these two elements sort of carry on in the background of most of the track, and it's really quite luscious and soothing. Lots of later tracks could have done with some more elements like this. Next, of course, there's Around the World. We all know Around the World, we all love Around the World. It's got that catchy vocoder line and that funky liquid-like synthesizer. It's so much fun and there's a lot more attention to detail than most of the album. But they know that the hook is good, so they string it out to 7 minutes. Do I think it needed to be that long? Absolutely not. You'll start off loving this track as it gradually filters in and then has that noise just before that bass line and the synth come in. But as it goes on, you really do start to get kind of sick of it. I often strongly dislike radio edits of electronic tracks. They often cut out basically all of the progression of the track and leave it feeling rushed. But this is one of those cases where I actually think that the radio edit is superior to the original track. Just keep it short and sweet, guys. No one's really gonna want to keep listening to it if you loop it for 7 minutes without making enough progression. Track 8, Rolling and Scratching, is a somewhat infamous track in the Daft Punk discography, mostly just made up of this simple 4-to-the-floor beat and this massive, rough, buzzing noise that gradually grows in intensity. It's a track that also passes the 7-minute mark and doesn't have all that much going on. So you'd think I'd hate it, but surprisingly I kind of like it a lot more than you'd expect. Sure, it starts off kind of slow and there's the brr, brr, repeated a load, but it actually has more progression than most of the tracks on Homework. Even though there's not all that many sounds at all coming in or going out, that buzzing sound is gradually growing or lessening in intensity throughout the track, which means it's got lots of peaks and troughs, and it's not just a loop. Obviously, if I'm not in the mood for it, it can be pretty annoying. But if I am in the mood for it, I could just be headbanging along as the sound is screeching like... Teachers is a nice little sub 3-minute track with 2 voices, one pitched up and one pitched down, listing off the various influences of Daft Punk, backed by a vocal snippet and a fun squelchy bass line. It's also a pretty unique track in the context of the album, being the only one with lyrics that aren't looped. Yeah, it's fine, it's fun. Not really much to it, but it's not annoying. However, High Fidelity is luckily another track that I do consistently viscerally enjoy. It's another one of the chopped up vocal sample tracks, but it's a lot better than most of the others for a few reasons. First of all, it's just a good sample. I hear a lot of saxophone and it's got a good sidechain effect that makes the beat much more punchy. But it's not just one sample, it's multiple samples. Even though they're from the same track, it makes it a lot more progressive and varied as they're changing and fading out and fading in. And it's really satisfying to listen to, and also laid back, Revolution 909 style. Rock and Roll is basically the sister track to Rolling and Scratching, with another simple 4/4 beat and another harsh and abrasive sound gradually growing in intensity. And it also passes 7 minutes. This one in particular is the longest track on the album. But this time, instead of just an atonal buzzing sound, the synth sounds like an enraged electronic wasp. And it's subsequently either more annoying or more headbanging, depending on who you ask. Now, for me, this does get on my nerves more than Rolling and Scratching does. I think there's less going on in the background, and when it reaches peak intensity, it is just, how shall I put it, sounds like it's trying to destroy your eardrums. So, I can get some similar pleasure from listening to this track as I do with Rolling and Scratching, but I think this is just a bit obnoxious. By this point, the album's kind of run out of steam. The next track, Oh Yeah, is just a half-baked screw around with some vocals and distorted beats, with basically no melody to be found. This track does have some things going for it. There's a bit more going on in it, and I enjoy the distortion on the beats, but it feels very deadpan. There's not much life to it, and the vocal samples are pretty annoying. Oh yeah, if you've been again screaming under the... Yeah, there's a sort of lifelessness and unfriendliness to this track that I can't quite describe, that really doesn't make me want to come back to it all that much. Pretty skippable. Next. Luckily, the next track, Burning, does bring back some energy and flavour to the album. It's quite fun and silly. I can understand how someone would find it annoying, but I've got a bit of a soft spot for this one. The main lead is just this synth that starts off like woo, woo, and then gradually grows until it's going wee-oo, wee-oo. And it's also got a little shuffly bass like ding, and a sort of garage-like beat. Like I said, maybe some could consider this a little bit obnoxious, but you know, I just don't I just try not to take this one too seriously, and I'd happily take it over one of the other more bland and flavourless tracks. Indo Silver Club is a track I see a lot of people finding pretty forgettable, and while I admit it isn't one of the massive highlights on Homework, there are quite a few things that it does really quite well. The sidechained sample is pretty fun and energetic, and I've come to realise kind of resembles what they'd go on to create in Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger, which of course is a fantastic track. It's also got a weird detuned, wonky bass line going doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, which is a tiny bit overused, but again, this track just is pretty fun and danceable in my opinion. And then Alive is basically the closer to this album, and it's one of the better tracks on here, I think, mainly because of its interesting sound design. The massive hissing reverb on this track makes it feel like it's taking place in some cavernous space. So that makes it pretty interesting and unique, even if it's a little bit one note. I'll take it. And finally, Funkad is a little outro which takes a tiny section of Daft Punk and reverses it and then just fades out. So, as you can tell, I've got pretty tired of talking about this album all the way through. It's very long, it's a 73-minute album. To sum up, Homework is an album with some great ideas which demonstrates Daft Punk's knack for making some incredible hooks, and it starts off strong, but then towards the end of the album it kind of loses you with its overbearing repetitivity. At least that is just my experience. I think some people may really enjoy this album, but there are a lot of issues with it, and I think that it could have been executed quite a lot better. I think it kind of says something that even I, someone who listens to a lot of repetitive electronic music, finds this album just too strung out in general. If you're someone with a fairly short attention span in terms of music, I think this album will probably lose you halfway through. But again, just my opinion, tons of people consider this album to be a classic, and there are a lot of things it does very well. Just a bit of a flawed record. So overall, I think I'm gonna give Homework a strong 6.5 out of 10. But I'd love to hear what you think, so leave your thoughts on this album in the comments section, all that, yada yada yada, blah blah blah. That is all from me today, and see you next time.